And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. I'm really excited today to have on kind of someone that I consider to be a new friend, a partner in the space of foster care, Takkeem Morgan. Takkeem, how are you doing this morning?
Josh, I'm excellent, man. It's been a relaxing weekend, and I'm happy to be up, healthy, and safe here this morning with you.
So, big idea. Takkeem works in, this is maybe for some people an oxymoron, but public sector innovation. And so a lot of people don't think about government and innovation together. But Takkeem is working on that. And there's a new effort that's launching here in the state of Indiana called Every Child Indiana that's going to drive more recruitment of foster parents. And a big part of this podcast is what do we do next as Christian citizens? And we know from our governor that foster care is a huge need in Indiana. It certainly is the same around the country. And so I met Takkeem recently, and he has these ideas that are not staying in idea stage. They're getting implemented. And so I wanted to talk to him about his really remarkable story, what led him into this space, and then how is he innovating, working with a lot of other people to make a difference in foster care. Then what can we as Christians in the church learn from it? So looking forward to that. Takkeem, I'll let you maybe jump in and share a meaningful story from your work in public sector innovation or from your life and what got you involved.
Absolutely. So for first of all, thanks for having me on the show. When we first met, I sensed a spark and an energy from you that was very infectious, very passionate. And I appreciate the fact that every time we've met since, that energy level has remained consistent. So thank you for that, Josh. And I enjoy sharing this time with you on the show. The story I want to share with you occurred when I was in the 10th grade. I had failed the ninth grade. And so I was supposed to be in the 11th grade. And everyone knows that 11th grade is the time that you start to really think about what you're going to be when you grow up, right? What are you going to do when you leave high school? And at this particular time, I was in foster care. I was living in foster care, and I had been living in foster care for several years. And it was tough. Most people that know the experience understand that growing up in foster care is tough. You're separated from your family. You're always kind of feeling like you don't have grounding. You don't have a place to belong. And so that's a tough experience. But I had met a guardian angel, Mr. Finney, Chip Finney. He was my ninth grade teacher. And I didn't continue in his school to the 10th grade because I went into foster care. And we maintained our relationship because he found me in foster care. But we were having a conversation one day, and he was asking me about future plans, about what I'm going to do when I finish high school. And he was getting frustrated by the answers that I was giving him. And so he said to me, asked me a question: what do you see yourself in 5 years? And the question was heavy. It was immense. It was a question I had never considered before. Um, and so it kind of took me off guard. And I really didn't have an answer. I gave him a half answer. It was he didn't accept it. And he said to me, Takkeem, I want to encourage you to develop a vision of your future. And it was the first time I heard the words vision of your future. It was a foreign concept to me. But he didn't just leave it there. He actually asked me to close my eyes. He said, I want you to think 5 years into the future, and I want you to tell me what you see. What are you going to be doing? Who are you going to be around? What are the colors? What are the scenes? He's like, I want you to really actually visualize the physicality of your future, or a future that you imagine. And what transpired over the next few minutes was an exercise in visioning. And he went on to tell me that, I could think about my life as a movie, as if I'm the director. The beginning and opening scenes I don't get to write, but I get to write the remainder of the story. And he really opened my eyes to the agency that I had to influence the future, and more than the future, my own future. And so that actually is a lesson that I learned from my mentor that I carry with me every day. And it really motivates me to get real about my visions of the future. And I think that what I've been able to do over the last few years here in Indiana has been the result of that lesson.
That story is so encouraging in a number of ways. One, though, is having worked some student ministry, a lot of conversations you have with 10th graders. So you're like, this is going nowhere. This was, I want to think that nothing is a waste of time when you're pouring into people, but you're just got to scratch your head over like, well, is this worth my time? Did that really make a difference in a kid's life? And here you are now making a strategic difference in our state. And the second thing that came to mind, though, is as we're having conversations with those in the foster care space, also helping those in addiction recovery, this idea of mentorship comes up time and time again, that you can have programs, but it's that person that really cares about you. That's kind of, maybe they're a step ahead of you as far as maybe age or experience in the field you want to go into, but then just coming alongside and helping somebody. In the church world, we call that discipleship, and that's the way that we're supposed to change the world. So, wow, that's amazing. Have you had a chance to stay in contact with your mentor since then?
Me and my mentor got off the phone about 2 hours ago.
Okay. Okay. Wow. That's
I
awesome.
actually called him and told him thank you. I call him often and say thank you for the lessons. I was reflecting on that lesson this morning, actually. So it was,
Hmm.
kind of appropriate that you had asked me a story, because I was thinking about that this morning, and I had spoken to him about that very lesson this morning. So
That's awesome. And certainly it's a great exercise for any of us to think about, well, how can we be the director? We can't always control what happens in life, but can do our best to say, hey, this is where I think I can best use my talents. So what a remarkable story. Kim, I wanted to start first just by asking you with a little bit about what inspired you to dive into innovation in in the public space, but specifically in child welfare, and maybe some of your own experiences in the foster care system.
absolutely. So I'll say this: when I was just 10 years old, I was removed from my mother's home and placed into foster care with my three other siblings. And that experience changed my life, because I witnessed firsthand what it feels like to break bonds that seems like they're never supposed to break.
Hmm.
And I think that was the first time that I began to think about innovation, because this is a family, and it's not quite going the way that at least the movies say that a family's supposed to go. A family's not supposed to have foreign forces come in and forcibly separate them. At least that's not the way it seems like it's supposed to happen. But if it does, right, then what? Now you have to maybe re-engineer that family. Maybe you have to bring in some different new ideas that can strengthen and improve that family, since it's not going the way that you imagine it should go. And so I think for me, I began to have that innovator's mindset right from the onset of that separation of my family. And I believe that sparked some of the deepest creativity inside of me, in terms of how to reconstitute my family. Right. That was the core of the motivation. How do I bring my family back together, and how do I make us stronger than we were at the point of separation? And so I would say that was, the early innovators mindset. If you're talking practically, it may be a different story, but I do think that that's where it started.
Just looking through a little bit of the timeline that you have there on the website, and I mean, it just seemed like there was kind of tragedy after tragedy there with your, I believe your mom now out of the picture, and then your grandmother passed away, um,
So,
and so I'm just so sorry that those happened. I I imagine that having experienced those sort of things, you could have just taken as, life is terrible. All these bad things are happening to me. Forget the 5-year vision. Um, this is just going to keep going. One question I did have was, were your siblings together with you? I know sometimes in foster care, the problem is kids get split up. Not only are you away from your parent, but then you're away from your siblings.
Yeah, well, what I would say is that there was four of us from the beginning. Our initial placement was a kinship placement, but it was not appropriate. It was not a good placement. It was not a healthy placement. So that was unfortunate. But let me back up. We kind of jumping into this a little bit. So let me
Sure.
give you some context. So my grandmother was 14 years old when she had my mother. All right. So this is a child that is raising a child. And she's raising a child in a community that experiences generational poverty, for generations, for decades. And so poor a young mother in a community that doesn't have a lot of resources. And so there was trouble brewing very early in my family. And it continued through through my birth. My mother and my grandmother did not have a very good relationship. When we talk about parenting skills, I don't believe that some of the knowledge from the ivory tower was trickling down into our troubled community, our struggling community. And so the standards of care, the standards of quality of life, of what it means to create a strong bond with your children, these things were not the norm in our community. In fact, it was more of a crisis center where people were putting out fires left and right, whether it was the fire of hunger or whether it was the fire of mental health, the fire of uncertainty, not knowing where your meal's coming from the next day. Um, and so that was the environment that I grew up in. And unfortunately, we had systems in place that didn't really center and value family. And so it was not a priority to strengthen this family. We had a system that was primarily focused on ideas of safety, right? Ideas of safety as it related to, the child, to a child within a family. And I think that we could have benefited from more of a honoring of the unit of our family, right? And saying, how do we try our best to preserve this unit as we keep everyone safe that's in it? And so I wish that would have occurred. And so a big part of the motivation for my engagement in the child welfare space after receiving the gift of education is to try and make it a place where well-being is centered and family units, family structures are centered as well. That we are thinking about the need to protect children because it's so important, so paramount. I mean, it's our future depends on us protecting children. But I think what we're coming to now in the space is understanding that one of the best ways to protect a child long term is to make sure that they can thrive in a healthy family, right?
That's
And
great.
and we
Yeah.
do understand that not all birth families are the place for every child to be, but we want to honor family in general, meaning that the first thing we want to do is honor the family and support the family. If the family structure or existence needs to change for that child, that's fine, but we do prioritize that first.
It's encouraging to hear you say that. We took off on the podcast just from a biblical standpoint of having these kind of three institutions: church, family, and state. And if all three of those are healthy, then you have a flourishing society. And we've asked numerous legislators over the last couple of years as we meet between pastors and legislators and ask what's the worst problem in your district? And this is a nonpartisan uh, answer that is the answer almost all the time. And they use essentially the same language, and they'll say the breakdown of the family. And I know that DCS and government agencies like it around the country are dealing with that. It's like trying to put a Band-Aid on a broken arm sometimes. But if that agency in its work, because they're coming in a crisis situation, but can long term see, all right, we got to get the family healthy, not just pull the kid out, put the parent in jail or whatever it is. So that's not a perspective I've heard often in my time representing parents in child in need of services cases. It was that wasn't the conversation very often. So I'm encouraged to hear that perspective. Takkeem, you mentioned a very difficult childhood, and I'm just blessed to see, and you've explained kind of the mentor that was in your life. But what were some of
Yes.
the other factors? I know you had to have resilience, and but what were some of the other factors that led to your success, despite you can't change that. That's kind of the cards that are dealt to you. But what were some of the factors that led to your success?
Educators. Educators were a key piece of helping me navigate complex systems and complex decisions and stages in life. Mr. Finney was my English teacher when I was in the ninth grade. That's how he and I's relationship developed. But after high school, actually, even in high school, I had a counselor that helped Mr. Finney and I helped me apply to Penn State. Getting acceptance into Penn State. By the way, I was accepted into Penn State under the Act 101 law, which was a law that was specifically designed to help, poor, underserved individuals gain access to higher education. Very, very important because without it, my story wouldn't be what it is. So that was a huge piece. Penn State, going to Penn State, a Research One university, a Research One institution, and having access to the world and having the perspectives that come from the world really opened my eyes to possibilities that the small community that I grew up in was not the end of the story. In fact, it was only the beginning of the story, and it was a very small piece of the story. There was so much more to see, so much more to know. So I think that was I think the education piece was a major component. And I think that the love of Christians, right? I met quite a few Christians in my walk that decided that that they wanted to walk along. They wanted to walk alongside. They wanted to serve, teach me how to serve with me, and do great things. And so that occurred as well.
Well, there's so much there. I took a course. It was probably a 4 to 5 week course where we just did a few webinars, but then we had an on-site visit from a podcast guest named Philip Herman, who's been working in a neighborhood, underserved neighborhood there in Des Moines, Iowa. Just a remarkable individual, has a remarkable ministry. And he said something that just struck me and has stuck with me as well. And he mentioned that poverty, it is a lack of resources or a lack of money at times, but he says poverty, much more than that, is a lack of connections. And the more I've thought about it, if we can serve individuals by helping them get that connection to Penn State or get a connection into something they feel led to do, you help them kind of take that next step. So I was just thinking of that quote, and I think truth when you mentioned that.
So Josh, it's funny that you should mention that, because one of the key observations that I made as I reflect on my experience in the child welfare system and my family's experience is that I know that we suffered from a lack of connection, a connection to resources, connection to family, connection to a vision for ourselves, the opportunity to create a vision for ourselves. Um, and once I got the education, once I received the education and I went out into the world and had the experiences and got to a point in my career where I could contribute something positively towards the same system that I struggled to navigate as a child, the thing that stuck in my head the most was, can you create greater connection for families, for parents, for those that are trying to create safe and healthy, thriving homes for their children? And that became a bit of an obsession. So, as you know, I started a uh, um, um, social impact technology company, Mosaic Parent Hub, and the core idea behind Mosaic Parent Hub is to create a space of connection for families. The thing that's unique about Mosaic Parent Hub is I want to blur the lines between foster, adoptive, and bio and birth parents, particularly those that are impacted by the child welfare system. I would like, I envision, I should say, a future where families and parents across the spectrum of the type of parent that they are able to first exchange information, ideas, resources with each other, but also come to one place and learn and get access to critical resources that allow them to create safe and thriving homes for their children. What I realized in my research as I survey the child welfare space is birth parents are looking to create safe and thriving homes for their children, the ones that are struggling with poverty with two parents that are in the workforce. Foster parents are struggling to do the same thing. Adoptive parents are struggling to do the exact same thing. And one of the things that connects these three parents is that the children that they're raising often are struggling and battling some of the same challenges, mental health challenges, education challenges, struggling with generational poverty, to escape the mentalities and the health effects that come from growing up in those experiences. Those are the children that usually need adoption. Those are the children that usually need fostering and who come in contact with the system from their the birth side of their family. So I'm hoping to be able to innovate the child welfare space by creating these opportunities for connection.
That's right. And I did want to take a little bit of time there with your story because for listeners, I know we all have individuals in our life that we are pouring into. And if not, go find that person, right? And we want to be strategic about how we go about that, certainly showing them the love of Christ, as you mentioned, that critical factor of discipling them. In my time in student ministry, I was always, burdened by kind of the kids that would really jump in and get it, and sometimes the kids that wouldn't. And I'd love to see more of the people that we're ministering to grab this 5-year vision for their life, get the connections they need, and move forward. So whenever I see success stories, like, all right, could we reverse engineer that just a little bit and see how that worked? So I wanted to grab that story, share with the listeners. You already have jumped in a bit into your innovation in this space. Backing up just a bit, though, why do you think states need to innovate in the foster care space? Why does tech especially need to be rethought in this space? And I think a lot of listeners would probably agree that the system itself is maybe, if not broken in some places, certainly could be optimized. But maybe you could share a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of that.
Yes, I think the primary reason that um, the system needs to innovate is because the only constant is change. And what we see is the voices of people with lived experience rising to the top. And those voices are saying the experience that we had is unacceptable. Okay, the outcomes that we experience are just completely unacceptable. Um, when we talk about the United States both federal and state governments. We're talking about some of the strongest and most brilliant governments, in the world. And I maybe not brilliant, but capable. You can debate the brilliance, but you cannot debate the capability. We've with our governments managed to do some pretty amazing things, right? And people with lived experience are saying, I think we could do caring for children and families better. I think we can do that. Um, and so the moment that we find ourselves in is that people like myself who have lived experience and who have an intimate knowledge of the system and its shortcomings have ideas for how to make it better.
Yeah.
And we have a loyalty to the system because the system has impacted us so much. And I think because we are loyal to the system and we were impacted by the system and we see opportunities for the system to change in a positive way, the system must change. I think it's that simple.
That's great. And just that concept of if we're going to interact with families and we want to care for people, I mean, government has a tough job. And I think it's a biblical one we talk about in the podcast, 1 Peter 2, government's role is first punishing or restraining evil. I mean, there are parents out there that are on drugs that are harming their children. And I do think that the state has a God-given role to step in and protect the vulnerable there, but also to promote good. But if you're going to be doing it, and like you said, you have people coming out or saying, this did not work. This needs to be done better. It's a great opportunity, I think, for the state to jump in and also for the church to come alongside and say, how can we help with that process as well? So
absolutely,
there's a new effort that was piloted in Oregon called Every Child. I know that you're helping bring Every Child to Indiana. So could you start by explaining a little bit about what happened in Oregon, why that was successful, and kind of the vision of recreating that in other states?
That's right. So, absolutely, and thank you for asking. So, as I shared with you before, the way that I came into this work here in the state is through a fellowship with the Indiana Department of Child Services. I was recruited by a national nonprofit, trained and embedded with the Indiana Department of Child Services under the Foster America Fellowship. And I was tasked with evaluating the state system for recruitment and retention of foster families. And I was asked to identify opportunities to improve the structure in the way that we recruit therapeutic homes in particular, but homes all across the state of Indiana. And I delivered a recommendation to the state director at the time that said we needed, there was an opportunity for us to speak with a more unified message, a more unified voice, and that there was an opportunity for greater collaboration across the state with among agencies that are responsible for placing foster children. The state director thankfully reviewed my recommendation and accepted basically the full recommendation and began to implement the full recommendation probably about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And the result and the culmination is Every Child Indiana. Previous state director reached out to a team out in Oregon called the Contingent, who had been doing something similar in terms of a statewide approach to recruitment and retention. And so their model and the way that they were operating seemed to fit the recommendation that I gave to the previous state director. And about the end of the year last year in December, I got a call that said, hey, we're looking to organize a statewide recruitment campaign under one message where we bring together all of the pertinent stakeholders in the state. And we heard you've been working on this, and we'd love to have you help us implement this. And so Mosaic Parent Hub is leading the implementation of Every Child Indiana here in the state, along with Susie Roth of Hands of Hope and the Contingent.
So just to a question about stats. I've heard different statistics, but that something like 50% of foster parents will quit after first year, first placement. That may be older data. Do you have any recent data on kind of what is the retention rate of parents that
Well,
jump in?
so that data is about 2 years old, and I don't have the most recent data, but that 2 year old data was one of the first comprehensive studies that the Brookings Institute CHAMPS program, the foster care CHAMPS program, conducted that research, and so that's what we're still operating off of, and the agencies tend to agree with that's a reality, that first year is a very challenging year for first time foster parents. That's also the reason that I gave the recommendation around the messaging, right? Because what we heard when we would do the exit interviews of first year foster parents is it's not what I expected.
Hmm.
So what it told us is that the messaging could use some work in terms of the messages we use to recruit. We think that the understanding of what the role is was not being made clear. One, two, the support for first year foster parents was not adequate. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited about Hands of Hope in the care
Hmm.
communities model,
Yeah.
is because the care communities model is a response to data that says foster parents are not getting enough support when they take on these roles, which are the role is unpredictable. You don't know what child is gonna come into your home, and you don't know what set of needs they're gonna come with, right? And there's no easy way to introduce someone to the unpredictable nature of the needs that a child may come with. And so what we have to do is we have to tell real stories about real foster parents that are actually caring for real children,
Hmm.
and show people what the experience is like. And so this effort is attempting to do that.
So I had a chance to be at a summit that you helped put together, and by the way, I was just really encouraged. I wasn't sure exactly what to expect sometimes going to these things, and there was an exercise where individuals were introducing themselves, and it was this major um, organization, this major ministry was there, DCS was there, and having worked in the space of trying to get leaders to collaborate together at times, and I'm sure the church leaders listening to the podcast know all about this. Like that's hard to do, and so it was a great event, and I was able to see how I believe this is going to be website driven, app driven. There's going to be a lot of digital marketing, and where this fits right into what our ministry is trying to accomplish is we're trying to get more churches engaged in their zip code to make a difference. And one of the key ways we want to do that is through foster care. And for churches, a lot of times it needs to be where, when, why, like 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, show up with a blue shirt on. This is what we're going to do. So
Absolutely.
this will be, hey, you preach a sermon on we need to care for the vulnerable. How do you do that? Well, let's help with foster care. Well, how do you get involved with that? Well, go to the Every Child app, sign
That's
up.
right.
And what I loved about what I was hearing is that you're not going to get like some automated AI customer service line that tells you to push 2 and 3 and 4, and then you just get fed up and push 0. We were talking about that. But actually have a live person talk to you, interact with you to get you signed up, set expectations. So I just sense, man, this could be a game changer for how do you make it simple to go from I'm interested, I want to jump in to let's get involved. So I've explained a little bit about that. I know I was only catching a snippet of what Every Child Indiana is going to do, but maybe dive into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of how this could help foster parents get involved, but also church leaders that want to make a difference, how they can use this as a tool.
Absolutely. So Every Child Indiana is an exercise in collaboration, and is an exercise in collective impact. What can happen when we all come together and have a unified message, and we have a unified mission, and our mission is the same. What can happen? How much can we accomplish? And our focus for Every Child Indiana is to deliver more than enough for every child and family that's in need in the foster care, adoptive, as well as for children that are in foster care, as well as in adoption. We hear often that there's not enough. There's not enough therapeutic homes. There is not enough resources for foster parents that want to foster. We hear that there is not enough. And what we understand is that when we look at the community of believers and we look at the folks that have good hearts, we do think that there's enough of those individuals. We believe that we need a way to organize them. We need a clear message, and we need to show them that the leadership on this issue is unified and speaking with one voice and working together. And what the evidence and the data shows is that when we do that, we get a more positive response. We get more people coming to the table and at the very least expressing an interest. And we believe that that interest trickles down and leads to engagement and success stories. And so we're hoping to execute a plan like that across the state. We brought together over 30 community-based organizations from across the state of Indiana, north, south, east, and west. And we asked them to lean into a collective vision of the future for how we recruit and retain foster parents. A focus on wellness, a focus on whole health, and a focus on family.
Just really encouraging. And our Governor Holcomb, spoke at the mental health summit that the state had put on Tuesday, and the Chief Justice of the state was there, key legislators were there, and he mentioned just a sense of synergy, or kind of like sometimes there's just the time has come, and maybe it's a Victor Hugo quote about there's power in the moment when the time has come, but just sensing that synergy, and this seems to be part of that. And I just want to communicate that to church leaders, that there's a lot of energy, things are coming together. I think God, as from a Christian perspective, would say God's moving, opening doors here. So what is the timeline as far as kind of rolling all of that out? And I know you don't have exact dates, but just a general sense of when we can be expecting this.
Well, first, you mentioned Governor Holcomb, and I've got to take the opportunity to really acknowledge the governor's leadership as it relates to really digging in and finding the opportunities to improve the service to children and families. The governor has made big commitments just recently to children and families. IARCA just announced I couldn't go through the full sheet of all of the new dollars and new attention on the child welfare and family space. So I really have to, tip my hat to Governor Holcomb and his administration and the work that they've been doing. I've had an opportunity to engage with them on a few occasions, but every time they're always about the business. It's kind of interesting dealing with a administration and a political operation that doesn't really operate like a political operation, right? That's really about, hey, where's the opportunity to make an impact? Not to make a headline, but to make an impact. And let's see if we can make that impact. It seems that that's the mentality that Governor Holcomb and his administration operates under. I know that he worked very closely with former DCS Director Stigdon. I know that he has a very strong relationship with current DCS Director Miller. And so it's just been really impressive, the drumbeat that they have maintained from the time I started with the administration up to now as it relates to increasing the attention, the support, to foster families and to families and children in need in general across the state is very impressive.
It's good. I know we're coming up on a hard stop for you, and because this is going out to a national audience, we often talk about things going on in Indiana, but I'm excited about the idea of the states as kind of a laboratory of democracy. And if you're in Oregon, it's already there. There's a project going on in Arkansas from Every Child, and the hope is that if this really gets off the ground and explodes, as I'm pretty confident it's going to, then this is something that other states can copy. So, if you're not in a state with Every Child, maybe just listen in, see what's going on, and maybe you could take it to some of your state leaders. Team, I enjoy every time we connect. I'm blessed by your energy as well, and just bringing the skills that God's given you and social and marketing and collaboration, pulling people together, and you're invested in this space. So we got a last question. If you had a billboard on which you could put a message specifically to Christians, but also it may just be the general state as well, what would you put on it?
I would say encourage innovation because change can be a blessing. Encourage innovation because change can be a blessing.
That's good. And I certainly see that in your life. And also, I'm encouraged by the number of church leaders that see, all right, we're in a different moment post-COVID for church leaders for sure. And we can look at that as a challenge or kind of gripe about it, or we can look at the amazing opportunities that are coming and just try to live in that and see how God's blessing people's lives. Let's I look forward to many future conversations working with you to try to impact our state for the common good. So thank you for taking a few minutes of your time. We'll link to some of the things that you're working on in the show notes, and we'll look for the kind of launch date for all of this and make sure we get churches aware, or make churches aware in Indiana.
That's right.
So thanks again for coming on.
We're looking at October for launch, Every Child,
Okay.
a quick launch. It's been a pleasure, Josh. Thank you so much for having me on the show.